So hello, everybody. I'm Jackie Comp. I'm not from Seattle. I'm from New York. So I will try to not do the New York Minute and talk too fast. I am thrilled to be here today with you. My session is going to be pretty practical. And my mission, I run global sales for Knock Knock, so I work with a lot of our customers. And my mission today is to help you answer the question, how do I get started with FIDO authentication and with my FIDO authentication journey and strategy? So likely if you're attending this session either here or remotely, you may be convinced that, in theory, that implementing FIDO makes sense. We get a lot of companies who come to us and are very excited about the possibilities, but they often don't know where to start. They don't know how to get there. They're confused. Basically, they don't know in practice how to get on that journey. And that's what my session is going to be about. I'm going to be sharing with you best practices from companies that Knock Knock has worked with, major brands who have successfully started that journey. I'm actually going to give you 5 examples of companies and how they got started and the many benefits that they are receiving today for having started that journey. Most of them are B2C use cases, which hopefully will be interesting for you because there's some tremendous benefits to removing friction and improving the security of your consumers. You heard a lot this morning about security keys. Well, that's not really an option on the B2C side as much. 2.5%, I think, was what they said Twitter got. That's actually pretty high for security keys. Usually, consumers, they don't want to carry something extra. So I will be sharing with you how these companies have made that journey. So the good news is that it's not only possible, but it's actually practical to get started on the journey. The thing is, though, it doesn't happen overnight. And if anyone comes in and says to you that they're going to get you there that quickly, I would be suspicious. The reason is that you have deep-rooted systems. Your legacy authentication has probably a lot of layers to it. It touches a lot of organizations. It's also behavior change. When you talk about your customers and the way that they're used to interacting with you and with your systems, and you're changing that, you really have to be mindful. We know everyone hates passwords, but they are used to it. They know how to use it. And so again, you have to be mindful about how you take them on this new journey. Now, the good news is that we've seen historically that when you introduce a more convenient way for your users to access your digital systems, they will embrace it. No one thought people would use biometrics, and then Apple introduced Touch ID, and voila, all of a sudden everybody was rushing to enable their mobile apps to leverage the platform authenticators on, the biometrics on those devices. So, finally, if you're kind of going about it the right way, it's part of a broader digital transformation effort, and so it's going to be involved in other things that you're might be changing out in your stack. And again, so it's going to be a phased approach. But again, the good news is that you can get started and you can start reaping the benefits, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. So where to start? So we often get companies who come to us and say, I want to implement FIDO 2, or should I implement FIDO 2 or UAF? Or platform authenticators, biometrics, or security keys? And what about pass keys? And what about discoverable credentials? And, is this stuff all ready for prime time? And while those are, of course, things you'll want to understand, it's typically those questions are coming because it's being led by a technical focus. It's coming from the engineering organization or the security organization. And again, while those have a place, if you're not lifting up and kind of looking at the big picture first, you run the risk of implementing a tactical solution and a dead-end solution, and even worse, confusing your business owners and not doing anything. And so you really have to be mindful about the approach that you take. The the more effective approach for long-term success is to really step back and understand the business problems that you're trying to solve first, and not get caught up into the weeds of the protocols. If you are in engineering or in security, it means talking to your product teams, talking to the business owners, understanding what is it that they're trying to improve, onboarding, authentication success or speed. This technology, I won't say for the first time, but it is a business, security is a business enabler. And that changes the conversation, because usually when you go to your product lines and you tell them that you want to improve the security, they think, okay, more friction. But this is actually a time where you can have less friction. And so you want to understand what are their drivers, what are the use cases that they want to solve, where are the current methods of authentication creating problems for the business. Once you understand that, then you can come back and take a look at what are the capabilities that you need in the solution to address those business drivers. And you may also discover that it's not just about the FIDO protocol. There's other things that you need to support the whole user journey. And really thinking about it holistically makes a huge difference. And I'll be sharing with you examples of companies and how they went about doing that. So we typically at Knock Knock work with our customers through various stages. These are not rocket science, but it's really important. The first is obviously, as we say, to set your strategic direction, making sure that you are working with the organization on this is transformational, moving from all the legacy kind of spaghetti that you have to this new paradigm. And I don't think people need to be convinced anymore that passwords are bad or that, you know, users hate them and that they're not secure. We all know that. It's now, how do we fix this, right? How do we get to this target state? What does that look like? And what are all the places that we want to address? And sometimes your organization doesn't understand that. So I say, if you go in and start talking about the protocols versus what does it mean to remove friction in these different places, you'll get a lot farther in terms of the adoption. And as part of that, you're going to be aligning the different stakeholders. Authentication touches many departments. We work with security teams, engineering teams, product teams, support teams. And you know, you often run into things like the product group might say, well, I already have Touch ID enabled and Face ID enabled on the mobile device. Why do I need this new way of doing it? And I think you might even hear another one of our customers later, Verizon, talk about that, is educating the product lines that the way that they're doing it is, you know, that there's a better way to do it that opens up new possibilities for you behind the scenes. So you want to work with all your stakeholders, and then this is an important piece, is then prioritizing your use cases. You don't have to boil the ocean. What are the things that are most important now that you all agree in this vision of this is the direction that we want to go? What are some of the first use cases that would have that would be most realistic for you to address and that would have the greatest impact? And this is where it's also helpful, quite frankly, to work with a partner who's done this before and can share with you what's possible, you know, examples of best practices for how to go about it. Of course, then you need to design your architecture. As we said, authentication is a layer in your overall stack, so you're likely going to be integrating with your IDP or federation solutions, and you know, there could be other systems that you need to be integrating with. And then this is a very important piece, is detailing the user journey, really understanding how your users' interaction with you and your systems is going to change and what you want that to look like. And it's going to be different if you have multiple products, and I'll be talking later about Intuit, right? They have lots of different products, and how their users interact with those products is different. And so you really want to understand the user journey that you're trying to achieve with the specific product that you're implementing this in. And then finally, one of the best practices is to have a phased rollout to target certain numbers, you know, a certain population, test it out, refine it, and continue. And the good news is that it's so exciting that I really can't say that there's one customer that hasn't started with this who hasn't been blown away by the initial results, even something, a small start. What I'm going to be focusing on right now are the use cases. So basically these 5 different companies, what were the use cases they got started with, and what are the benefits that they are now achieving. So the first one, as I mentioned, is Intuit. And we all know how much we love doing our taxes every year. And users always forgot their passwords if they did have an account. And if you were a new TurboTax user, no one really likes doing it anyway. And then, Intuit, and I'm not sharing anything they haven't shared. They made you do your username and your email and your phone number, and now type a password, and no, it's not enough characters, and it needs to be uppercase, lowercase, and now type it again. And you would get transaction abandonment. For you to go through that friction, you got to really want to do it, right? And we've all experienced that. So what they did was they only now ask for your phone number and your biometric to start the process. And then you get in, and it knows who you are, it remembers you. Immediately, they got a 10% increase in onboarding. 10%. I mean, each percent, most of you know, can be worth millions of dollars. They also improved their sign-in speed quite dramatically, or their onboarding speed by, I think it was 50%. And then as they rolled this out to their other products across the board, they have Mint, they have QuickBooks, they saw across the board on average a 6% increase in sign-in success, which again, moving the needle even 1% can be really difficult. And here they had a 6% increase. Again, each percent worth quite a lot. So just phenomenal results. Now, I will say that they had that issue of how do I help explain to the product owners why we're doing this? And they were very clever. They actually created a little video and socialized it internally for people to understand, why are we migrating from here to there? What is the value of this? And they didn't explain the difference between UAF and FIDO 2 and discoverable keys. It was just, business value. Why are we moving to this? And as a security organization, you can trust us that this is much more secure. The next is also a great example. This is T-Mobile, who's also talked publicly. And they're actually one of the early adopters of FIDO. And they wanted to implement biometrics in their mobile app. They made it really difficult, and they were, again, admitted it, when you forgot your password, you had to call into the call center. It costs money. The care center reps, was tough for them. People were unhappy, disgruntled, and so they had a choice. They could go and use some of the APIs that are available to do it on your own. But they stepped back and they recognized that leveraging a protocol like FIDO made a lot more sense. It's like an abstraction layer. You don't have to develop for every single device. It's, works with all the devices. They wanted to work with a partner who had experience in doing it. They also wanted a platform that could scale, because they envisioned continued growth in being able to do additional things. So for example, now if you have T-Mobile app, you can sign up where when you dial 611, it automatically authenticates you. You don't have to, your name, your PIN, your maiden name, those kind of KBA questions, it automatically authenticates. And there are some additional things that they've done with push and some other kinds of things. But again, they had a huge reduction in password resets within the first 3 months. So again, a very big ROI. And they got very quick adoption. So nice use case. Now, I'm not able to share with you the names of every company that I am going to be talking about today, because some of them don't want, I don't have permission to disclose it in a public forum like this, but they have given me permission to share their story. So this is a Fintech who their goal was to try to improve the speed in accessing their web app, because they required a lot of SMS OTP and other kinds of step up to protect the assets, right, as a Fintech. So they implemented our solution in their browser application, their web application. So whether you were coming in from a mobile browser, Android, iOS, or whether you were coming in from a Mac or Windows machine, you were given the option to log in with your platform authenticator. Now, here's the interesting thing. They did very little education to their user base. There are some best practices that the FIDO Alliance has actually shared on UX and how to help people understand why they would want to do this. They just sort of silently rolled it out to see what happened, and very quickly they got 40% adoption. That's pretty incredible. Now they want more, so they realize, hey, we need to prompt people, maybe a little button that says, why should you do this, that kind of a thing. They increased their sign-in speed by 8 times. So, the product teams were absolutely thrilled. And again, behind the scenes, the security team is very thrilled because they know that they're protecting their users more. And the users are happy because they're getting access to their information very conveniently. It's secure. So just, again, another really nice example. One other company that I can't share. They are very conservative, and they are in a market where there's a lot of fraud, where they required their customers to go in branch to be able to transact certain types of services. And they wanted to reduce that friction and reduce that cost, so they implemented our solution, FIDO, into their mobile app, and we actually developed for them, as part of it, it's part of our platform, they have a PIN authenticator as well. Why that was important is they have devices in their markets are often shared by multiple people who are, they wanted to separate them being able to get into their own accounts. And so with the authenticator PIN, it's still FIDO based, right? Nothing's on the server. Each user could have their own PIN, and it's FIDO. You're still device binding. It's still, what in this case, going with it versus who you are, but still possession based. And a lot of companies won't share their fraud rates, but they had a significant decrease in fraud. And again, they improved their application rating dramatically because people were very happy to be able to do a lot more online. The last example is the B2E example. This is very interesting. So this is Tepco. They're a power company in Japan. And they had a new program that they were rolling out where basically residents, when they see something unusual, the resident could take a picture of it and send it into the service team. And it would allow the service maintenance, 2,000 maintenance people, to more quickly assess and triage where they should be focusing their time. And so the problem is that they had very stringent regulations internally for having to use very strong passwords. And the executive sponsor of the program said, there's no point in me introducing this program and trying to have business reform if my maintenance workers are going to have to deal with these complex passwords. So they implemented biometrics and completely solved the problem. And whether that maintenance worker is coming in from their mobile device or their PC, they're able to do it without a password. And again, they were able to meet their response KPIs that they had as part of this program, and it's been very successful. So these are 5 examples of how people got started. Again, you don't have to boil the ocean. Just pick a use case that is important for your product teams and work with the providers. It doesn't have to be knock-knock, but you know, there are experts out there who have done this, who have worked with organizations. And as I say, what you also find is that if you're looking at it holistically, it's not just about the protocol itself, it's about all of the things that you need to support a user journey for a next generation of authentication. You know, think about that whole piece of it, not just the challenge response of the FIDO protocol. Too many considerations that in 20 minutes for me to really share, but these are some top-level things to walk away with, is that it is important to have a solution that you can do a controlled rollout, right? So that you can target certain user populations, test things out, make your product groups comfortable, that they're, again, B2C especially, right? They worry that, oh, what if people can't authenticate? So you can work with them to show them how that works. Have a way to solve the problem. How do you know if you should prompt a user? Does your solution have a way to prompt to know I should prompt this user for an authenticator because I know that they're enrolled or they're capable? How to address users who don't have the ability to, who don't have a credential? Having a way to adjust policies, because you will, how you want. The policies that you put in place day one may change over time. And you don't want to have to hard code those into your apps. So having an easy way to adjust your policies operationally, how to, as you're migrating from legacy to next generation, these are some of the things you need to think about. How to bootstrap a new device. When you don't have a shared secret anymore, and I have this device, how do I now go and identify myself on this other device so that I have a credential on it, right? What are some of the easy ways that I can make that easy for a user? Scalability, account recovery is a similar, if I have no more devices, how do I set up a new credential? Scalability, especially if you're dealing with B2C, our customers have tens of millions of users. So making sure that if you're going to put something into your network, into your data center, that it's going to scale. As I say, looking at it as something that is a proven approach versus a science project and a dead end. And finally, the great thing about a FIDO-based solution is that it is future-proof. We hear more and more of the ecosystem that is supporting. Even Apple is now supporting FIDO. So it's a way to feel very comfortable. Okay, my last slide here. In summary, really take a solutions-oriented approach. Don't try to don't focus on just the technology. Lift your head up. Look at all these use cases. Talk to your business partners, and then you really can start with something today and expand. You don't have to boil the ocean and get great benefits. And the good news is that once you do start showing the organization the great results, they're going to want to invest more, and they're going to support you more to roll it out into other use cases. In case you were wondering how we got our name, it really is, next time someone comes and knocks on your digital services, we can tell you who's there. So it's a little play on knock knock. I'm Jackie Comp. My email address is there if anybody wants to follow up with me. I don't know if we have time for questions. I think I might be out of time. So feel free, though, to reach out to me if any of this is something that you want to follow up on. Thank you. Sure.
Hearing very often that the time to get started is now, and you can take incremental steps to get there. And so thank you so much to Jackie Comp and Knock Knock for that great presentation. So next we actually have a company that's on the journey that wants to talk about how they're using FIDO for passwordless authentication, and that's Verizon. And we are bringing in Bjorn Helm and Jasna Katru remotely. So I think we have them with us. They're coming in. Bjorn and Jasna, do we have you? Okay, we're just waiting on the audio. And the overlay I have in front of me is incorrect, just FYI. Thank you. Bjorn and Jasna, do we have you with us?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
We can. Please take it away.
It's almost like a Apollo movie.
That I know it is a little weird to present to. But you have a lot of people in the room. I'll tell you that.
Fantastic.
Great.
So Sam, are you gonna display the slides for us? There we go. So are we ready to get started?
Yeah, I guess we can get started, Bjorn.
Okay. So Josna and I decided to do a overview of Verizon's FIDO deployment. I represent the network at Verizon, and Josna is part of the device team. And so we have divided this presentation into three sections: the why, how, and where we deployed it. So if we go to the next slide, the why, what, and how. So we go to the next slide. Josna's gonna start with why we decided to deploy FIDO and the flavor that we decided to. So Josna, take it away.
Thank you, Bjorn. So hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Josna, as Bjorn mentioned, and my team leads authentication and identity activities and requirements from a device perspective. So I'll talk about the why part of Verizon's journey to FIDO as an authentication solution. But before I begin the actual presentation, let me share a few interesting findings from 2021 Verizon DPIR report. So we did hear quite a few stats today. First, of course, the breaches, as always, continue to be mostly due to external financially motivated actors. 61% of breaches involved credential data. 83% of data compromised is personal. And this was from the financial and insurance industries. And fourth, phishing increased by 11% over last year. So, this statistics is just to show that, how often the security breaches are happening and the data continues to be compromised. And the key ask we get for our teams here is to have a best-in-class authentication solution. And that's one of the major motivations for our why aspects of journey to adopt FIDO. So for our customers, it is important, just to give you a background, that why from a business perspective, that for our customers, it is important that they're protected against the security breaches and against centralized repositories. Of course, passwords do increase delay and bring friction. But for Verizon, FIDO was strategic not only from customer first, but also security and privacy requirements. As well as, we get some business requirements that being able to support multi-channel, for example, have coverage across device ecosystem, and providing authentication assurance as needed. So what does FIDO bring from a technology perspective is, number one, like you see on my slide over here, is standards. Of course, being part of the device ecosystem, having a standard-based interoperable solution is key. And with these standards, we are able to leverage the mobile handset ecosystem for authenticators, the type of authenticators they're bringing, capabilities to secure private keys on devices, and other protocol support. The continuous work that FIDO is doing with, the working groups, liaison with other standards body, and ensuring that we have a secure and interoperable solution as our needs evolve is important. Second point is about leveraging the mobile device for the Verizon ecosystem and how it works for us as an MNO. So in addition to the OEM capabilities with FIDO, we are able to capture presence, for instance, and be able to secure consent as needed. Biometric data doesn't leave the device. It helps us meet many of the privacy regulations and allows us to deliver on a solution which is available across the board. And lastly, it is about scalability. We heard about scalability from multiple speakers previously. So for us, of course, we need to be able to scale for the subscriber base, but it's important that we are able to scale for our use cases. Our use cases keep evolving. Our business models are evolving. And as we are going from 4G to 5G, we believe that there will be many services and needs that will need to be addressed by the underlying architecture for authentication. So we should be able to bring in new authenticators and solve for business cases. Next slide, please. So this is to sum up why we chose UAF and what were some of the reasons that prompted us to go with the UAF architecture. So with this FIDO approach, we can provide the strongest means to authenticate for the user. What I mean is, like, we can bring the authenticator of choice that the user can use on the device. If they want to, if the application wants, they can provide the user with a way to bring a fingerprint or Face ID, do a combination. If they need it, we could bring a new authenticator. So we are able to bring new authenticators onto the device without requiring an software upgrade from the OEM, for example. An example that we will talk about later is Zenki. Zenki is able to use the biometric OEM authenticator and a PIN authenticator. So the applications do get control over UI and modality, which is much more. We are able to leverage device binding and silent capabilities along with the biometric indicators, providing a much stronger authentication capabilities. And of course, a key requirement, like I said, was we have to provide the applications with the ability to enable FIDO across the board on both Android and iOS ecosystems. The last point is about being able to do step up as needed. So with this approach, the applications, depending on the policy, can, bring up the authentication as a step as and when needed. For example, is the transaction high valued? Are they coming in from a different location? Or any other trust or risk factors. So it can happen on device, or you can be doing a browser session from a different device and use your device as a step-up authentication mechanism. So these are some capabilities we can leverage. And to sum it up, it worked well for our mobile-first approach. And just to keep in mind some of the other things that we had to keep in mind from an approach was to keep the onboarding and the user enrollment to FIDO kind of experience they get on the device. Those are some of the considerations as they move from a native biometric UI support to FIDO-enabled support. What kind of experience is available for the customers? So to sum it up, of course, it worked well for the mobile-first approach. And I wanted to thank you so much for your time and share my experiences. With that, over to you, Bjorn. Thank you.
Thanks, Josna. I wanted to emphasize one thing, that one of the benefits of FIDO is that it allows us to provide authentication services on 4G as well as 5G. So it is transparent to whether we operate a 4G or a 5G type of service. And it had allowed us to continue to grow the FIDO deployment on the use cases that we can support. So let's go to slide 5. So Verizon went through a vendor evaluation and ended up partnering with Knock Knock for our FIDO solution. So we have the Knock Knock solution deployed in a virtualized environment. And we're also using an SDK that is integrated to the mobile application that leverages FIDO. We have supported a variety of authentication factors depending on what the use case is. One of the values we saw in FIDO when looking at various solution as well as standards was the ability to support various authentication factor. Most prominent at the time was biometrics. And as you all know, FIDO do not distinguish between what the private key is. So for us, that was a huge benefit of supporting various authentication factors that either the customer would prefer or that the use case would require. And so, as I said, we have an SDK that we integrate into our mobile applications. We support the multiple authentication factors that we support. We also have the ability to share the credentials between Verizon services. And you also heard Josna said that we do a device binding. So we added an EAP token to our process to bind the device to the user and the authentication factor. Go to the next slide. So Josna had mentioned that Zenki was one of the use cases. We picked Zenki as a use case for this presentation, but FIDO supports multiple of services and application for Verizon. Again, the user doesn't necessarily care whether we're using FIDO or not. They care about how they actually, what authentication factor they choose to use to access their service. But there are multiple services that is supported by FIDO for Verizon. So for the Zenki use case, for those not familiar with Zenki, Zenki is a joint venture between Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T to offer authentication services as well as verified attributes. And so it is based on the security of a wireless network. It is leveraging OpenID Connect for the federation part. There's also some additional implementations of proof of possession of your device and various cryptographic solution that leverage the wireless network. So that is the Zenki solution that we use for FIDO. So if we go to the next slide, I'll give an example of a user experience of the Zenki experience using FIDO. So if a user wants to leverage Zenki, they first would have to download the application. And the journey starts with registering the app with Zenki, selecting the PIN for Zenki. So the Zenki app or the Zenki PIN is different from a Verizon PIN for your Verizon account or other services. And so for Verizon, you have a choice to authenticate using your My Verizon login, or you can use Zenki if you choose to. But the authentication factors are different for Zenki versus the Verizon services. After you have set up your Zenki account, we go into the FIDO implementation. So we go in and you can select your biometric authentication factor. So Zenki supports biometrics, and for Verizon, that means FIDO. And the user, again, can choose to do Face ID or fingerprints. So the server will indicate to the application what the options are, and that will be displayed to the user as they select what biometrics they would like to enroll for the Zenki service. So using Zenki, you would log in and you would have the Zenki pop up, and using the biometric that you have chosen to register with the FIDO to log into the account. Josna also mentioned the consent. So there is also a consent dashboard for the Zenki service that you manage your consent for what you share and how you share it. So this is a tidbit of Verizon's FIDO deployment, and also a sample use case of where we use FIDO for the authentication. Again, it is not the only service that we leverage FIDO for, and there are additional use cases that we're working on where we will support FIDO in a 5G environment. And that is the presentation. So Sam or whoever holds the mic, don't know if there's any questions for us or.
Sorry about that. I just had to run to the mic. It's Megan Shamus. Thank you so much, Bjorn and Jessna.
That is okay.
Yeah, no.
That is okay.
I know you're probably wondering if anybody was here. We do have a full room. So we do have 2 mics set up. So if anyone has a question, you could either enter it into the app or step to the mic. And we do have about 5 minutes for questions. So let me just review. So one question is, you just mentioned that there's some additional use cases that you're looking at. Can you talk about any of that? Or what next steps are with those use cases?
So in the 5G world, there are a couple of new concepts being introduced. One is called network slicing. And so network slicing is a concept where you virtually reserve network resources for a specific purpose. Today, we have private networks that we offer to enterprises. And network slice is where you do the same thing, but you virtualize it. So some of those services, I'll use mission critical services as an example for first responders, requires user authentication to give them access to that domain. We're positioning FIDO as part of that user authentication for first responders. Another concept or architecture enhancements of 5G is allowed to have a distributed network. And so you have more intelligence in the edge of your network. There are use cases where using this edge architecture to require user authentication for either access to a service or validating that you have access to certain properties that is being managed by edge. And so that is where we're also going to leverage FIDO for the user authentication. Again, in the Verizon deployment, we have tightly coupled the FIDO authentication as well as our OpenID Connect implementation. So I don't know, Josna, if you wanted to add any additional use cases.
I think those are good examples. And of course, it's important that we have the underlying capabilities, and we'll be able to leverage even the attestation capabilities of going from one device to another device. And it just opens up ability to do a lot of things differently. Especially with 5G, we'll see multiple new devices coming, different from smartphones and other types of devices.
Thank you so much. So we do have a question in the room from Christian Brand.
Oh, I'm famous. I don't even have to say my name. Hello. I would have put the question in the app, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. Okay. So I guess I'll ask it here. So thanks for the presentation first off. This was great. I have a quick question, though, and I think you started touching on it a little bit. How does identity proofing here work, or how does it work when I move from one device to another? I would assume I'll have to reestablish my Zenki identity on that new device, because, I mean, obviously, as we know, the biometric credentials won't be leaving the device and making its way over. So how does that initial identity proofing work? How do we make sure it's the same user so we can give them back their profile?
I don't know if you want to talk to that, Josna.
I think with Zenki, we are leveraging user authentication with our backend, with our Verizon systems. So it's Verizon authenticating for the initial identity proofing. We would want to be in a place where we can take, the old device, be able to attest the user onto the new device so that, you make it easier for the enrollment process and have a much more passwordless approach. So those are some things to keep in mind for from a growth perspective, from going from one device to another device for upgrades or bringing in secondary device like your wearables or laptop or tablet enrollment, so that you're not relying on your username password. That's something that I would share.
So I think the real question is about how do you manage account recovery? And so yes, if you drop your phone and it doesn't work, the FIDO credentials are obviously gone. Within Zenki, Zenki does not define the technology you use to what you deploy. It's how you support the requirements. They specify certain requirements. They specify the OpenID Connect flows between the central point and each MNO. As it happens, not all members have deployed FIDO. So what happened is that we had to come to a least common denominator for how to manage the various implementation of Zenki. And so that means that you have options that you would select in terms of how you do your account recovery. Options include sending an email that you reestablish your account, and other options to come to point of sales. I would say that any of the Zenki options is the best user experience. And part of that has to do with that this is a collaboration between three operators, and that have a little bit different implementations as well as back office.
Thank you. We did have another question about account recovery from Libby. Did that address your question, or? Okay, it did. So we do have a few more questions, and we do have a little bit more time. I have a few questions in the app. Is there any more questions at the mic at the moment? Okay. So you mentioned a tight coupling between FIDO and OpenID. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that, Bjorn?
So the tight coupling in this case is that FIDO is for federal identity. FIDO is used as an authentication factor. It is not the only authentication factor that we leverage. I'll use the mission critical services as an example where we use OpenID Connect for the initial authentication request, and based on whether the user has enrolled in register their FIDO, we would use FIDO Authenticator for the user authentication. There are other use cases where, again, the authentication request comes in using OpenID Connect, and again, the purpose of the user authentication is to get access to a privileged domain, and for that we use FIDO as well. And so it's more about how we marry the request to authenticate as well as the authentication method that we use. Because sometimes if the user is known, we recognize the device, we leverage the EAP credentials. For low-level assurance, we wouldn't require a FIDO authentication. But for higher assurance, the request would be to leverage FIDO. So the tight coupling is more about the use case and how the user journey starts for the user authentication.
Okay, thank you. One more question. So on the user journey, after the setup with Zenki, what are the steps that the user has to take to authenticate in Verizon on web and mobile?
Justin, do you want to take that? Because that's for how the My Verizon and the Zenki kind of interchange.
Right. So for Zenki, once they're set up, they are set up to. They don't have to do anything for getting into My Verizon. Is that the question? Like, let me understand the question one more time. That they set up the Zenki first and then logging into
yes,
My
exactly.
Verizon?
Right. So they've set up the Zenki, and what is their experience then with Verizon on the app and on mobile?
So when they set up their Zenki, and if they didn't have their setup for My Verizon, they would first be prompted to set up for My Verizon and then get into Zenki. And the place where we're trying to be is like if we're in My Verizon, for example, in the desktop experience, we do allow now users to leverage their Zenki as an app. So to authenticate the user. So I can, when I go to my desktop and log into My Verizon, I get an option either to do the password-based option or log in using Zenki. And when I do Zenki, I get like a notification and use my fingerprint or Face ID, whatever biometric I've set up, and I'm logged into My Verizon Mobile. So that would be the experience you would get. If you're already on your device, you're already set up for login using your biometric. So it would be just like you'll be prompted for your fingerprint or Face ID, and you'll be good to go.
So that's the same experience on web and mobile? I mean, on the app.
On the app, you just enter your biometric, like you just
Right.
You set up, you say, yes, I'm good to go. If you're on your desktop, you typically get the experience for how you want to log in, and one of the options is log in with Zenki. And when you do that, you get a notification on your device, and then you just get a prompt for using your fingerprint, and they're into your My Verizon mobile, not My Verizon mobile, My Verizon desktop experience.
Okay, that makes total sense. Thanks for clarifying. Okay,
No
any
problem.
other questions?